Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Incomplete Skeptic. Our objective of the program is to give voice to the voiceless, hope to the hopeless, and to strive to bring humanity back into focus for those that have been marginalized. At least that's partly what we're looking at. And the exploration of ideas that maybe aren't very often explored, or when they are explored, they are cast a jaundiced eye, if you will. It could be life after death experiences. It could be wisdom of a homeless person, or could be something a little more around corners people haven't looked at all, like ex-convicts. Most people haven't seen around that corner, and we're good with that. My guest today is Darryl Schoon. He is an author of many books. One I have read in detail. He's a healer, a speaker, and generally an all-around guy of compassion. Welcome to the Incomplete Skeptic, Darryl. Thanks for being
Thank you.
on the show.
Thank you having me on, Timothy.
Yeah, my privilege. Darryl wrote this book, Light in a Dark Place, The Prison Years. And I want to ask you a little bit about this book, if you're game for that,
Sure.
and we'll be organic as we go through this as well. I don't think we're capable of anything less, really. But uh, why did you write Light in a Dark Place, The Prison Years? What sparked your motivation, or maybe your passion for writing this book?
Well, I everything that is in the book I wrote while I was in prison. All right,
Mm-hmm.
and I had no intention of writing a book when at all. And it's what happened is that this is the second book I've written. The first book I wrote was a novel. And curiously enough, Timothy, I was sitting there. I'd just been out of prison a couple of years, and I'm sitting down to eat in San Francisco, and a image drops in my brain. I mean, I saw an image. I just saw it, and it was a person, and he's looking at a monkey. He's stoned on acid, and the monkey. He looks at the monkey, and the monkey looks back at him, and the monkey says, "Who do you think you are, anyhow? At least I know I'm in a cage." All right. Now I went, "Wow." And so this is about writing, because a lot of people are looking for inspiration. I wasn't, right? In fact, I thought about it and I wrote it down. I had a computer and I wrote it down. This is 1994, and I looked at it and I go, I hope this isn't a book. All right, why? I had never written a book in my life. I had enough problems on my plate, and my thoughts about writing a book was that it was long and protracted and it was going to take a lot of work, and I wasn't up for more work. But anyway, what happened is I sat and around a week later, and I had no idea what this was, but I had a feeling. And so a week later, I sat down in front of my computer, and as best I can describe it, I wrote into the feeling. 5 pages came out, one chapter. A few days later, I continued. 5 pages came out, another chapter. Over the next 6 months, 34 chapters of equal length came out, and the book was written. All right. That was my first book. It was a novel called You Can't Always Get What You Want. Well, the book that you referred to came along a few years later. And this was 1999. And a friend of mine who I had met in law school, Marshall Thurber, uh, uh, Marshall was very different than me. Didn't smoke, didn't drink, didn't do drugs, and straight arrow as they come, driven. I mean, driven. He's an Aries, all right? And he's an uber Aries. Me, uh, I'm not driven, except I'm driven by other things, all right? I am sort of driven, I guess. And a year after being in law school, after meeting Marshall, I dropped out and became a hippie, and I'm living on Haight Street, all right? And our lives were very, very different, though there were many, we always stayed in touch. We were always best of friends, and we still are to this day. Well, in 1999, I get a call from Marshall, and he says, I want you to read a book. I want your feedback on it. I go, sure. So he says, call this person, and the book is called Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle. And the book is famous in metaphysical circles now. It became a bestseller. But this is before it was published in the United States. All right. And the person he had me call was Eckhart's original publisher in Canada. That's the circles that Marshall ran in. I mean, he runs in a totally different circles than I do. All right. So I call up Connie Kellogg, the publisher, and I tell her that Marshall's told me to call her and to get a copy of this book. And in fact, I've been in touch with Connie in the last month, curiously enough. Well, this is 1999, and she sends me a book that they had published, Namaste Publishing in Canada. She's the publisher, and it was not yet published in the United States. It was going to be. New American Library picked up the rights from her, and it was going to become an international bestseller. Right? Well, Marshall knew about this book before it hit the big time. So she sends me the book, and I'm reading it, and I'm stunned because Eckhart, what he wrote about, I recognized were many of the things that I had experienced when I was in prison. And I didn't expect it. One of the things, let me give you some backstory on the Power of Now. Eckhart Tolle had been a lecturer at Cambridge, all right? And he said he was disturbed, he was beset. His life was hell inside of him. Very high achieving, lecturer at Cambridge is no small feat. And he was on the verge of suicide, right? So I guess it doesn't matter how good you're doing out there, it's how you're doing in there that determines what you're experiencing. And he said life was hell. He was really considering suicide. And he said this thought ran through his mind right before he passed out one night. And the thought was, I can't stand myself anymore. I can't stand myself anymore. And as he was passing out, that thought, and he said those words in his mind, a thought ran across his mind, and this is the one he remembered. Maybe there's two selves. I mean, if I can't stand myself, who is the self that can't stand it? Or what is that self? Or what is the self? And Eckhart passed out, and he said when he came to, his eyes were closed, and he heard a bird chirping. And every time he heard the bird chirp, he saw like a diamond go like this in the darkness. And he woke up, and his world was different, and so was he. He had no explanation. Eckhart wasn't into metaphysics. He hadn't been into meditation. He was a lecturer at Cambridge, and his life had been miserable, his internal life. And when he woke up, he was different, and his world was different. And he said it took him years he didn't know, he had no context. But he knew he was living in a totally different reality. And out of that reality, he wrote a book called The Power of Now. All right. And one of the first things that I related to when I read Eckhart's book was, Eckhart said that we're trapped in our minds, and in our minds and our emotions, that we experience realities or life through our emotions and through our mind. And what he said was this. He said, the mind pulls you forward into a future that you know nothing about, but you become obsessed by it. All you're doing is thinking, if my future was better, I would be happy. And he said, that's sort of balanced by your emotions, which pull you into the past. And he said, so you're never in the now. What he called the now. The book was called The Power of Now. Well, when I read that, I remembered something I had written when I was in prison. And this is what it was. Will a future that never happens determine what I do today? Will a past that ever lingers be the reason I feel this way? I mean, it encapsulated exactly what Eckhart had said. Now, when that thought came to me in prison, Timothy, I wrote it down. I found it rather profound, all right? And the reason why I wrote it down, and the reason why the thought came to me is when I did my 7 years in prison, I had a 10-year prison sentence. I started meditating like a motherfucker. I mean, seriously meditating, I don't do weights. In fact, Marshall had come to see me in Tucson, and we were driving around Tucson a few years ago. And he said, "Hey, Darryl, did you lift weights when you were in prison?" And I said, "No." And he said, "Why not?" And Martha out of the back seat goes, "They're too heavy." All right.
That makes sense.
That makes sense.
That sounds like something my girlfriend would say.
Absolutely. But I did meditate. And I got to say, I mean, what was it? I started my prison sentence in the 10-year one. I had a shorter one before in 85, 86. And I had started meditating 20 years before when I was in Haight-Ashbury. And I pretty much meditated on and off through those 20 years. But Timothy, when I hit the big house, I started meditating big time. I mean, seriously. And what happened to me, I didn't expect. I got what I believe was enlightened for a period of time. Or I was in a place that I knew that people sat in caves, gave up their whole lives trying to get to and never got to. I knew when I got there, I was there. I was talking to it. And I didn't expect it. I really didn't expect it to. It just happened to me out of the blue. But I know it happened because of all the intense meditation I'd done. The only thing close to that experience was when I was taking all that acid, all right, years before, and you'd always come down. But there were similarities between what I experienced on acid and what I experienced in prison in that meditative state. So when I read that in Eckhart's book, I was stunned because he got there, and he got there by almost a nervous breakdown. I mean, he was suicidal. You know, that was his entree into the now. And so what happened is that after I finished the book, I sent Marshall a few pages of what I'd written. And there were, I think, specifically 5 or 6 pages of what I consider spiritual writings. Most of my writings in prison weren't, quote, spiritual like that, but they were emblematic of that state that I was in. And I sent them to Marshall. I never showed them to anybody. I mean, I didn't even show them to Martha after I got out. You know, I mean, what do? You show, hey, look, I got enlightened. This is what I wrote. No, nothing. That was just something that had happened to me. You know, I was in there 7 years. I wrote a whole lot, and it was stacked in my papers, and I never brought them out after that, basically. Well, I sent them to Marshall, and Marshall said, you got to send these to Connie. So I sent them to Connie, and Connie wrote back, and she said, wow, you were really in a liberated state when you were in prison. I'd like permission to distribute these at Eckhart's seminars in Vancouver. All right, this is before he became famous. And I said, sure, you have my permission. Well, that was 1999, 2000, all right? And Marshall said, you got to write a book if this is what Connie says. Because I told him I had all these other writings. So I took a bunch of the writings I had in prison, along with these spiritual writings, and I put them together in a book, in what I considered a book form, you know. And Martha read it, and she said, you know, Darryl, she said, you told me all these stories of when you were in prison, of stuff that happened to you, and they're not in this book. All right. And of course, I had told her stories over the years of what had happened to me in prison and what I encountered, and they weren't in the book. So I wrote some down and put them in the book, and I interspersed them. As you know, you've read the book, Light in the Dark Place, and you can see they're just a broken up series of stories, poems, more stories, you know, blah, 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 till, you know,
Sure.
for the whole book. And so that's what I did. It was very different after Martha told me to write some of the stories down, and I did. So that was done in the year 2000, and clearly nobody. So I thought, well, I got a book now, and in fact, was really curious. is the title came to me, Timothy, when we were in a meditation with Eckhart Tolle.
Hmm.
That spring, he had come down to Santa Cruz and was giving a talk at a bookstore. So Martha and I drove down to listen to him, and we're sitting in the room, and we're starting to meditate, and that's when the words came to me of the title, Light in a Dark Place. And the image I had was of a prison at night. It was dark, penitentiary, with razor wire around it, black, stars in the sky, and there's one room in those little slits for windows in the penitentiary, and there's this bright yellow light coming out of it. That was the image that came to me, along with the title, Light in a Dark Place. Well, I send this book off to all these agents, zero response. Nobody wanted to hear the story of a drug dealer that was spiritual. I mean, there wasn't a big demand for this kind of stuff. So I set it aside. Well, what happened is, a few years later, Marshall puts together this group of people that he called the Positive Deviant Network. Now, like I said before.
Could you pronounce those words again? What is it called?
The Positive Deviant Network.
Oh, beautiful.
All right.
Love
now,
it.
Marshall had been, he just reads like a machine. I mean, in his quest. He's, like I said, he's driven. He's an Uber Aries, all right? And at that time, which is around 2003, 2004, he was studying two things, network science and positive deviancy. They had crossed his plate at the same time. And Marshall had come to the conclusion that networks was how everything grew. In fact, they do. Viruses, ideas, they all spread through networks, okay? Big hubs, small hubs. And Marshall had, he read it, as a scientist, as somebody, trying to figure this stuff out. And the other thing that he'd come across was the concept of positive deviancy. And he concluded that deviancy, or the positive deviants, were the ones who lived at the edge, which is what, when you introduced your program, you said it's for the marginalized, all right? Well, Marshall had come to the conclusion that in times of deep, great, profound change, the answers were not found by the people in the center. The change always starts at the edge, among the marginalized. And the marginalized know not everybody in the margins got the answer, but the answers are at the margin. And he says, as the changes happen, those answers get closer and closer and get adopted more and more by the center. But they're only found initially at the margins. And sometimes those ideas never make it to the center. But in times of great change, they do. So Marshall had this idea in 2004 to start a group called the Positive Deviant Network. All right. And he knew a lot of different people. Like I said, Marshall ran in a very different crowd than I did. And so he puts this group together and he asked Martha and I to join. All right. And he says, you guys are the most deviant people, some of the most deviant people I know. I mean, we're all hippies. All right. I mean, we ran in totally different circles than most people do. Well, there's around 60 to 70 of these people. The dues were $7,500 a year, I think, the first year. We were comped because we didn't have any money. We had money, but not that kind of money, to put that out and meet 4 times a year. But anyway, we joined this group, and we met 4 times a year. And one of the things in the group that the group did is Marshall said, you feed the network. You feed the network. That was one of the things that Marshall wanted to do. Well, as an example, one of the people had this CD. He was a millionaire from selling the CD. It was on sound waves and on consciousness. All right, and they were selling these things for like, I don't know how much. We never bought it, but it was like $300. All right, big. He was rich, and so he gave them all to everybody who was in the network. There was around 70 of us. All right, and so let me tell you about the first meeting, Timothy. All right. We meet. This is the first meeting of the Positive Deviant Network, and I think 2004 or 2005. All right. And there's 70 people. Martha and I are two of them. And it's over a weekend. We're at some hotel. We meet in this meeting room of the hotel. And I knew some of the people there because I've known Marshall for, at this time, what is it? I met him in 65. So this is 65, 75, 85, 95, 30 years later. All right, 30 years later. And so I knew some of the people in the room. Most of the people I didn't know. And so Marshall says, all right, when we sit down, he said, don't sit next to anybody you know. So we don't. Then he said, all right, turn to either the left side or your right side and pick the person. All right. So I do. I'm sitting next to this young kid. He looks like he's in his early 30s, but I got to be in my 60s by 55 or like that, And Marshall said, okay, this is how we're going to introduce each other. 5 minutes. You tell the other person what you've done in 5 minutes about your life. Or no, it's 10 minutes. All right. And then you write down, I want you to take notes. Or the other person take notes. And then he's going to tell you what he's done and you're going to take notes. All right. And then I want you to put I've got all your names in this hat. And I'm going to walk around and somebody pick the names out of it. And I want the person, if your name is picked, I want the person to tell what you told him. All right. Well, so I look at this kid. He told me first. He went first. And he'd been one of the people who started AOL. All right. And his life, it started out really strange. He grows up in the East Coast, very high powered, and he's a rebel. All right. Doesn't get along with his father. His father sends him to a military school. Hates it. All right. Comes out of the military school, really uptight. All right. Comes in and goes to college, really uptight. Finds computers, finds his rhythm, joins this little startup. He turns into AO, he's a part of the, and now he's rich. All right. He's bank. He's a kid. All right. Now, this was after, a few years later, but still, that was sort of his thing. Right. Well, he tells me a story. Turns to me, he's got his little notepad and he says, okay, well, Timothy, there I was. I was either going to lie or tell the truth. All right. And I was past lying anymore. All right. So I started telling him law school, Haight-Ashbury, jail, prison, presidential invitations, all this shit about my life, 10-year prison sentence, and his face is like, holy shit. He's writing it down. All right. So Marshall passes around the hat. My name is the first name called. Boom. Holy shit. People crap. All right. I'm in this room with him. Second person whose name was called, he owned all the Remax franchises in the state of Wisconsin. That's pretty big, Timothy. The real estate offices own all of it.
Took me a second, but yeah, right.
In the state of Wisconsin. Well, he started out in a gang in Toronto. So when he decided to get out of the gang, he had to get out of the country. He just don't resign from the gang. And he came to the United States and made his fortune. So this was a very odd. Now, I got to say, and I always suspected it was set up. Marshall always telling me, no, it was the hat. It was the hat. It was the hat. But it was just too weird. All right. But I think he made the point for the rest of those people in the crowd. This was not your usual group of people. All right. Who were spending $7,500 a year to meet 4 times a year. Well, the reason why this story I'm telling it, is that the next year, Martha and I are going, because all these people are giving everything to people in the network. I mean, we fly to this place, we take these seminars. I mean, this is a very high end group of people that were doing a lot of stuff out there. And Martha says, well, what do we do? I said, I don't know. She says, let's give them a copy of your book. So Martha goes, and because she's done a lot of graphic stuff in background, she puts together, we print Light in the Dark Place. We have it published by ourselves. This is before Amazon. And we hand all these copies out at the next meeting of the Positive Deviant Network. That was our gift to the network. The reason why it was important to me was the next year, Timothy, I present my book because I didn't have this other book at the time, the book which made me sort of famous. Time of the Vulture. All right. I mean, the reason why I even wrote Time of the Vulture is that I'm with these high-end people. Marshall introduces me to this guy who, he's low key and says, Darryl, John's really concerned about the economy too. You guys should talk. I mean, this is Marshall's network thing. I had no idea his provenance, but I had a suspicion it was a lot bigger than mine in finance. What I found out later, John he was retired. He had a hedge fund. He had a multi-billion-dollar hedge fund out of London and New York and had retired. And he was also concerned about the economy. Well, I knew that he wasn't as concerned as I was, because I think you found out that I heard these words when I was in prison about the Time of the Vulture in 1992, and became obsessed with it and became convinced we're going to hell in a handbasket. All right. So I thought, if I'm going to talk to John or at least say anything about it, I just can't say, yeah, it's really fucked, isn't it? So in 2006, I started writing what turned into a book, Time of the Vulture. And it was because of John. So we presented this at the March 2007 meeting. It was a 148-page paper. I present this. Most everybody in the room was rich, and they're really uptight, Timothy. I mean, I stand up there. These people got bank. All right. I mean, you're spending $7,500 a year to go to his meeting with 50 other people. All right. 4 times a year. That's pretty much that kind of money. All right. I mean, they got money. And I got up there and I said, because I've done a lot of studying on this, we're in trouble. The wheels are about to come off. All right. And in that 148-page paper, I gave my reasons why. All right. This is March 2007. Well, in support, we decided to publish this thing on the internet. All right. So we got this thing in the mail about how to publish on the internet. And it said it was $1,000 to do it. Well, we don't do that kind of stuff. But if the pitch was so incredible, I'm reading it to Martha, and she says, how much does this cost? And then her next words were, it doesn't matter. Timothy, that's how good the pitch was.
Wow.
All right. I mean, this guy had figured it out. This is 2007. So he said money back guarantee. So we sent him a check. He sends us his recipe. We read it. We never asked for our money back. And I think a whole lot of people paid him $1,000 and never made money from it. But we followed his instructions. We put it on the internet. All right. We sent it to him. He said, what? You're going to charge $30 for this thing? He said, there are people you're going to save fortunes. He said, this is ridiculous. You charge it. So we charged an average of $100. All right. PDF download for $80. This is because of this formula. We never would have done this without it. We put them on the internet, called survivethecrisis.com. If you want to go up to www.survivethecrisis.com, that website's still there, even though nobody goes there anymore. All right. So, because he said, this is back in the early days of the internet. He said, you need the description, the keywords in your title. Now it doesn't matter because everybody's on the internet. Then it did in 2007. We put it up there. In the first 2 months, we got 10,000 hits from 120 countries. We hit a chord. Boom! The economic collapse. The demographics of the people who went to the site, their average income was over 100 grand a year, and they had postgraduate educations. We hit it. All right. We sold 950 books at approximately $100 a piece in the next 2 years. The collapse happens a year and a half later, and people stopped buying my book. As Martha said, because what I predicted happened, and it was over. The book's sales were over. But it put me on the map. And I started I was writing articles in support of this book. I was published on financial sites all over the world. In fact, Timothy, you found me, and this is what I love about it. You found me on Jeffrey Mishlev's site. All right. And
Always
you
loved
told
his
me,
show. Always loved his show.
Yeah, you told me you found it when you were in jail, in prison,
I did.
on your radio
It's the first
in the
time I saw it.
90s. Yeah.
Yep.
You start listening to this guy who is off on the edge with these, and you become, that's where you found him. That's where you found this guy. All right. Well, what happened is that I had known Jeffrey since 1971. We're hippies. All right. He came into my restaurant in Berkeley. This is Dharma, lives and what happens to us. We're all connected. All of us are connected, whether we know each other or not. All right. All of it. You talk about a network, life is a network. All right. But only certain lives are meant to intersect at certain points at certain times. In 1971, I have a Chinese natural foods restaurant in Berkeley. All right. I'm about to go broke because we're going to be vegetarians. And we cut meat out. We went flat broke. All right. But this is before. Jeffrey is a student at Berkeley, and he comes to my restaurant. And we meet. All right. 1971. All right. What happens is life happens. He writes his major book called The Roots of Consciousness in around 1980. All right. He gets a TV program on PBS called Thinking Aloud. That's where you tap into him.
Yep. That's
in your
what
prison
I first
cell.
found.
All right. I have nothing to do with it. I mean, all I know is Jeffrey's happening. In fact, this is what happens. When I come out of prison in 94 and I write my book, the novel that I described, I thought, how am I going to get this published? Because nobody was going to publish it. I said, well, Jeffrey knows people because he's an author. So Jeffrey comes to see me after I get out of prison, and I'm living in a horrible section of San Francisco. All right. And Jeffrey's happening. All right. There's his friend, Darryl, living in this little studio in the Tenderloin. And I said, Jeffrey, I wrote this book, and I said, maybe you can help me get it published. And Jeffrey goes, Darryl. He said, what is it? I said, well, it's a novel. But he said, I only read nonfiction. I mean, you've listened to this guy, he only reads nonfiction. Jeffrey's one of the smartest people I know. All right. He says, but, here, give me the book. So I hand him the book. And Jeffrey read it when he was flying to Asia. He was speaking at a conference. He said it scared the shit out of him. There was so much tension. It was the life of a drug dealer. All right. And that was 1994. That was our paths connected again 14 years later. Now, this is why. I've written my book, Time of the Vulture. I'm now writing articles, and I'm on the web. All right. I mean, I am writing on some of the top financial sites around the world. All right. 1 year later, Timothy, I get an email from Jeffrey. Dear Darryl, I've been subscribing to Richard Russell's Tao Theory Letter for years. The Tao Theory Letter was the oldest blog on the Tao. What's called the Tao Theory. All right. And Richard Russell was famous. He'd been writing this newsletter for 20 years. And Jeffrey goes, Darryl, I've been subscribing to this newsletter for years. And he just quoted somebody named Darryl Schoon on money. Is this you? He couldn't believe it. Same name, same spelling. But the Darryl Schoon he knew wasn't an expert on money, sufficient to be quoted by somebody he'd been following for years, Richard Russell. So I went out and found out that Russell had taken one of my articles and 1.5 pages, put it directly into his International Tao Theory newsletter. And that's how Jeffrey and I reconnected.
Cool.
So
I like those synchronicities.
It's all, it's synchronous with, for example, you and I. That when I found out that you found Jeffrey in prison, listening to him on the radio, when I had just basically lost contact with him. I was in prison somewhere else. And then years later, you found me on Jeffrey Mishlev's YouTube channel and called me up and asked, for an interview. And here we are.
Yeah, I heard you several times on his different, he's done your program quite a few times. But then when I saw you on Gaia with Regina, and that's when I put it together. Well, wait a second, ex-convict, and I just had like this voice, that was saying I should reach out to this guy and just ask him. I mean, who am I to ask him to be on my podcast? I don't, I just followed it, sent it, and you said, yeah. I was going, oh, cool, and but reading the book, I expected one thing, and I got another, because I got some perspectives into like 9/11 and some things I had no comprehension of getting any more information on. I thought I kind of looked at that pretty closely already, and but the angles and the trails, the connectivity of your information was really solid in most ways. There's been some things that have come up since, but not too many people put it together that clearly. It's like, if anyone wants to know about 9/11 and to look at some background there, get this book, Light in a Dark Place. You wouldn't expect that information would be in this book, but it's really powerful on a lot of levels. But there is a synchronicity between your life and mine, that I perceived anyway. And, we can always write things into things because we all have our perspective glasses on. We're going to see it the way we see it, and we're going to see what, what I mean? I don't want to dominate this part of the conversation, but.
No, you're right, yeah. Timothy. We see what we see, whether our eyes are closed or open.
Yeah.
It's interesting to think about 9/11, because that ties into Jeffrey too, is that here's Jeffrey. I mean, he's big time. You've been following him since the 1990s. He had a station on PBS. All right. He's interviewed all the heavyweights, Ram Dass, blah, blah, blah. When I met Jeffrey in 1971, this is before any of us did what we did. I had not yet gone to prison. Jeffrey had not become a big media, in terms of consciousness. All right. But when I met Jeffrey, this thought ran through my mind, because, I was into consciousness then. And I thought, wow, this guy's read more than I have. And I pretty much read everything that was around, that was happening back in the early 70s on what was going on. Well, what happens is that how I came across Jeffrey's view to get on his program. I mean, he already knew when Jeffrey read me in Richard Russell's newsletter, he knew I had a reputation in money. I mean, I was there was one site in the UK called Market Oracle, and they had a list of all the articles I'd posted on them. And I think there were between 2008 and 2014, they posted around 120 of my articles. Well, they've been a total read of over 4 million. That's one website in the UK. All right. So I had my reputation in money. And the reason why Jeffrey even asked me to come on his program was last year, in 2019, I wrote all the information I had, and you read it in Light in a Dark Place about 9/11, was in that book, basically. All right, the outline. And for the viewers, for the listeners here, I want to say that it happened, and she's talking about Dharma and coincidences. My first year in prison, in 2006, I'm in Lompoc. All right, that's where, people call that the country club prison. All right, and I was headed for a much deeper hole than Lompoc, but it was fate that got me there. I mean, I was not meant to go to Lompoc, except I was meant to go to Lompoc. All right. I end up there because of somebody I meet in prison. I mean, Timothy, I heard these words. I'm waist chained, leg ironed up, all right, getting off the bus, what they call the chain. The feds call it the chain when they move you around, all right. I'm starting a 10-year prison sentence, and I hear these words. You're supposed to meet somebody here. You're going to meet somebody here. Yeah, I hear the words. Yeah, okay. I don't go to the next guy in the chain and go, hey, you know, I just heard these words. I'm supposed to meet somebody here. You know, keep that shit to yourself. All right. Well, I do meet somebody there. All right. And we start talking, and I end up in Lompoc. Club Fed. All right. I mean, Club Fed. I call it the penalty box of the stars. All right. When I ended up in Lompoc, my counselor there, he's reading my, my thing, my case, and he looks at me and he says, what are you doing here? You belong in the big house. We have the big house right next to us, level 4 or 5, gun towers. Lompoc didn't even have a fence. He says, that's where you belong. And if you do anything wrong, that's where you're going to go. Well, we became friends later, but nice. Given what he read in why I was there, I could see why he was shocked. But I tell you, that person who I was supposed to meet, through them I got there. So I'm at Lompoc in 1986. The first week, I meet Howard Hughes's banker. The first stinking week. I'm one of the unassigns. I've got this great little hideaway, what prison's like. You're like, oh, Jesus Christ, I don't want to, And my first week, I'm really lucky because when you're unassigned in the Fed system, you just fair game for anybody who needs work done. All right. And before I got assigned to a job, I ended up in the gym with all people like me, drug smugglers, my folks. All right. There was a whole bunch of San Diego pot and coke smugglers out of Surfer Boys, and they ran the gymnasium. All right. So, hey, I find my place. I go to the gym, hang out, until I had to do roll call again and blah, blah, blah. And I'm cool. Except 2 times a day, you had to show up for the count and roll call. And during those times, somebody who's got a special job thing can find you and get you to help them. Well, I don't want to go. I've got my little side thing at the gym. I'm happy. All right. So, but I got to show up. That's where they do the count. So I'm sitting there and I noticed, Timothy, some guy looking at me, and I could feel he was looking at me. Shit, I don't want to get picked. I want to go back to the gym. So I'm sort of moving around, and time comes. It's his turn. People get to pick people who have got a work detail. He picks me. My paranoia was right. All right. So there we are. I don't know. We got to wash windows. That's what the hell he had to do. He for some reason, he had to wash windows, and he could get to pick up one person to help him wash windows. So we're walking along, and I make one of my Darryl Schoon comments. Life is sure weird. And he responds, you think life is weird. I was Howard Hughes's banker. Now I don't go, no shit. You were Howard Hughes's banker? That Howard Hughes, the guy who blah, blah, blah. I don't say that. I don't say nothing. I just got to go and shit, I got to clean windows with this guy. Well, you talk about coincidences. He was Howard Hughes's banker. And we started hanging out, And the story he told me later, because he was convinced he was innocent. He said he told, I've been in prison. Shit, I remember going first time I was in jail, San Francisco County Jail in '69. I thought I should get out as a joke and write a book and say, there's something wrong with our prison system. Everybody in there is innocent. Because I was sitting there, everybody had a story, and they were all fucking innocent. So as a satire, I thought, I'm going to expose the criminal justice system because there's all these innocent people in jail, and just tell them their side of the story as a joke. All right. Well, Norman believed he was innocent. He'd been set up, but I don't say, wait, I don't say anything. His appeal was going to come up in 4 months. And, and when it did, and when he got turned down, he was shocked. he actually thought he was going to get out. He thought his appeal was going to cut him loose. So he comes to me and he says, "You've read this in the book." He says, because he knew I wrote. He said, "Listen, do me a favor. I'm going to tell you a story, and I want you to write it down and get it out of here for safety." Sure, yeah, I got time. So he starts. He takes me to his cube, to his room, and he takes out a box of papers underneath his bed. And the first one he shows me, I look at it, and it's you've seen it. There's a copy of it. It's a letter, and written on the letterhead of Trans Global Productions Limited, New York address. All right, Fifth Avenue. I don't know what it is, and it's addressed to Viscount Lord Cranborne, 2 Swan Walk, London, England. And it's a letter of introduction, introducing Norman Bernard Therian, my buddy at prison, to Lord Cranborne regarding financing, and saying that he was the past banker of Howard Hughes. And at the bottom of the letter, it's CC'd to 2 people. 1, Norman, Dr. Therian, and 2, General Robert E. Cushman. And Norman goes, "Do you know who he is?" I go, "No." He said, "Well, he was chairman of the board of Transglobal. He was also past deputy director of the CIA and former commandant of the U.S. Marine Corps." Norman said that's why he was in prison. So I wrote down his story. And eventually, what happens is some of the elements in the story that he tells me in 1986, I find out are connected to the bank to Bank of New York during 9/11. That's what it is. You've got it. Well, what happened is I put in the book. I want to tell you something. Nobody wants to hear it. People who are radicals in our society, people who are muckrakers, I've sent this to them. This isn't bullshit. I've got papers, and I mean, at one point, I've sent it to everybody. I sent it to Clinton's honcho because he was, you read it in the book,
Yep,
Webb Hubbell, and the Republicans were after Webb. They were on his ass. And I thought maybe Clinton could use a little help, with these assholes. So I knew Webb was his boy. So I find him. YCC, I call him up. Is Mr. Hubbell there? His wife answers, nice lady. "No, he isn't, sir." "Well, I've got some information I'd like to send you. Could you give me his address?" "Sure." All that Southern shit. Hey, she was the real deal. Gives me his address. I send it to him. He writes me a letter back. "Dear Mr. Schoon, thank you. I'll make sure this gets to the right places." Well, you know where the right places is? Clinton. All right? Don't hear anything. All right? Before I went to prison, I was on Dianne Feinstein's China committee. All right? I went to China with Dianne. I'll go tell them. So I got to prison in 1992, and I trot down, and I call up the office, and they send this guy out to talk to me. I went to China with him. He was her top aide. We were in Shanghai together. He knew me. I was on the China committee. I was happening back then before I got busted. All right, I had presidential invitations when Deng Xiaoping came to the United States. So I'm telling him the story, and I could tell Timothy, the longer the story went, the more he didn't want to hear it. He didn't want to hear it. And so he said, yeah. I knew nothing was going to happen. All right, I sent it to LA Times. All these people, nobody. I sent it to Bob Woodward. Nobody wanted to hear it. I did get something back from I forget the name of the program. It was A&E. It was an expose program, and they got back to me and said, "Mr. Schoon, thank you for your fictional account, but we don't do fiction." Crock of shit. I said this happened to me. All right, nobody wanted to touch it. All right, so finally in 2019, with all the stuff going on about Trump, all right, and Eric Swalwell, all this stuff happening in the Senate, I thought, well, maybe, I throw the chain. I said, yes, send it to Eric Swalwell of the House Committee on Intelligence. subcommittee on intelligence, at least stick it in his lap, in his face, put it up there. So I got 20 pages of the original documents, 33 pages. What you've seen in that book are only 4, right? Xeroxes of what Norman gave to me, and my own research, Xeroxed them, and the story that I told you. And I sent it to Eric Swalwell, House Chairman of the Committee on Intelligence, 1999. All right. Well, I sent it to him. I don't expect, you talk about cynical. I'm a cynical boy. These boys don't want to hear it. Like I wrote in the book, I said, man, I thought everybody wanted to hear that. CIA, Reagan White House, Afghanistan, all this stuff, corruption, everybody's going to do it. Nobody wanted to see it. Why? And I said, if it was a story of a Black woman who sold crack to fund an uprising against the government, everybody would want the story. But when it was about the boys in power, nobody wanted it. Even the ones that were being screwed, it was too hot. All right. So I decided, what the hell? 1999 is 2 years ago. I sent it off to Eric Swalwell, registered the thing, sent it to his committee, Washington, D.C., with a little note. All right. And of course, he doesn't write back. I knew he wasn't going to write back, but the I Ching told me to do it. I mean, the I Ching is that Chinese oracle.
There you go.
Yep. I've used this since 71. All right. I mean, I need radar. All right. Don't do it. Do it. Wait. Don't wait. Do it now. All right. So my radar, and it told me to do it. So I sent it to him. Nothing happens. Of course it doesn't. But I'm sitting at home, and I'm looking at what I sent him, and I think, wow, this is a book. Because with a front letter to Eric Swalwell, followed by 33 pages of scanned documents without the story, and then the story, you go, shit. Because the 33 documents, in the 33 pages, I've got letters to French bankers, to Swiss bankers in there. Letters from Nate Kamrani to the Saudis. Now, Nate Kamrani, it's not in the book. Yeah, I did write in the book. I said, this is what happened. Because in 2004, I'm sitting there thinking, and this is all fake. Why would I do this? I think, you know what? I'm going to email one of the guys in the story. He's a professor at University of Southern California. All right. And Norman told me he liked this guy, that this professor was a genuine patient. He wasn't part of the scam. All right. He met him very early on. So, I go up and look at University of Southern California professors. I find his email address. All right. So I write him, 2004. Dear Dr. Kamrani, I've had some conversations with Dr. Norman Bernard Therian, and he told me that you two were involved in blah, 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 that turned out to be blah, 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 blah. All right. I just email him at this university. 3 hours later, I get a phone call. He is flipped out. Where did you get this information? There's not denying all of it. Denying it. He says, this happened 20, 30 years ago. Why are you bringing this stuff up now? And I said, I had to make some money. I go, well, I'm writing a book, All right. Well, this is what happens. He calls me back later and he says, do you know anybody in the movie business? Well, I tell you, 4 months before, I could have said no because I didn't know anybody. But that month, I did. Marshall's son, if you Google Rawson Marshall Thurber, you'll find out his son. His son had just written and directed a movie called Dodgeball that was about to come out in the next month. All right. And Marshall had rented a theater in New York at the ArcLight for a private showing. So when Dr. Kamrani says, do you know anybody in the movie business? I go, yeah. Well, what the coincidence was, his son had just graduated from USC Film School. And you know how hard it is the film business to get into. So he thought if I was a writer, and certainly, so he had paid her. I did know somebody in the movie business. So I got invitations for him to come to the premiere. He shows up with his son, and I talked with him, and he told me about Afghanistan, going over there and finding and seeing all those Soviet-made weapons, new. And in the book, I talk about them. So he confirmed for the first time Norman's story of somebody who I was not just dicking around on the internet. Well, nobody wanted to hear it. So 2019, I sent it off. I decided to write my book. I said, because with the 33 pages in it, which is totally different. I mean, you know, psychologically, you see 33 pages, know nothing except the cover letter, and then see the documents, all the articles, and then you hear the backstory, you go, there's something, this could be it. All right, just the story.
Right.
So what happens is that I sent it off, and then I thought, okay, I'm going to publish this as a book with all the documentation. So I throw the I-Ching and said, yeah, do it. So I send this new manuscript, which has got, it's like the hot potato, it's like the smoking gun. It's as close to the smoking gun as you're going to get, because it says there's a gun here, there's smoke coming from it, here's where to look for it. You've read the book, all right? I sent it to all these people who are radicals, who are muckrakers, who have a vested interest in exposing them. I don't hear back from any of them, Timothy, and I know why. Because this could put them in the line of fire. The only one I hear back from is my old bud, Jeffrey Mishloff.
I love that guy has more courage. He will interview anybody that, no matter how controversial they are. I love his open mind, you know, and I really try hard to not be a cynic about anything. Critical thinking is fine.
Yes.
You know, it's like with the Republicans and Democrats, I've kind of viewed them as separate wings of the same bird of prey sort of a thing.
Yeah.
What's behind the scenes is kind of like, we don't always see that in the national news, you know. So, but yeah, that guy, I love people that will have a conversation with anybody and maintain the integrity of their heart.
Yeah.
You know, that's awesome.
And that's Jeffrey. So like I said, I've known him since 71. You talk about coincidences. So I know this guy who I can send it to. He writes me back and he says, Darryl, he said, fascinating. He said, you know, I'm not prone to conspiracy theories, but we do know they exist. Maybe we could do a program on conspiracy theories and how to look at them. So Martha and I went to see Jeffrey in Albuquerque, and he taped 4 programs. He taped 5 more. He had me on a ton of times in that year. All right. And it's from those programs that Regina found me. Somebody found her, sent my name to Regina. She interviewed me. It got on Gaia. We shot it last summer, a year ago, and they finally released it in January of this year. All right. And that's how I got on Regina's program. And that's how you decided to call me up. Mm-hmm. So it's this loop. We're all in a loop. We're in a loop.
We're in the spiritual network. The spiritual network.
We're in a cosmic network.
Right on.
So that's how the books got written.
So what are you working on now? I mean, that's a big question. I mean, I know you've got your church in Arizona. Is it in Tucson?
Yes, in Tucson.
Can you tell us a little bit about that, maybe, or what you got cooking there?
You know, hey, Timothy, I never intended to be a minister, but by the same token, I never intended to be a drug dealer. All right, and I never intended to be an expert on money. My life is quite unintentional at this level. All right. What happened was, and how we got involved, is when Martha and I came to Tucson in the year 2000. I was fucking uptight. All right. I mean, I had fought the law, and the law won. All right. Before I fought the law, I was a political radical, and I figured out its odds are stacked against me. All right. I mean, you know, pick one or the other. They both are going to throw me in jail. You know, one will be guilty about throwing me in the jail. The other ones, the Republicans really want to throw my ass in jail. You know, I mean, there I was uptight, and I wasn't talking to anybody except a few people, my hippie friends, Marshall, my wife, few friends, few. So we decide we're going to get out of Dodge. We're going to move out of this country. This is year 2000. So we come to Tucson. All right. Well, what happens is our first year here, Martha, this is part of the story, she almost dies. She almost she has kidney and failure, but we don't know it. We don't know this. And the guy I was working with, I was vice president I was condom salesman. I was selling millions of condoms. I was happening. All right. And we're out here. And so and Martha ended up working for the company too, doing graphics and stuff like that. And he stopped paying our health insurance and didn't tell us. So we find ourselves, Martha thinks, she doesn't know she has kidney failure. Martha says she thinks it was menopause. All right. And she says, if menopause feels like this, women aren't bitching enough. All right.
Right.
It was organ failure. All right. But we couldn't see a doctor, because if we saw a doctor, insurance is out, because he didn't pay our health insurance. So she's trying to get back on the Blue Cross. All right. During this time, her organs are failing. We end up, and she almost dies. We go to the hospital. Finally, when the insurance kicks in, we go to the hospital, and this is something. This is part of the story. On the way, they said in Tucson, they knew they couldn't deal with it. It was that serious. So they sent us to a liver hospital in Phoenix. They do transplants. All right. And they sent it to her, and Martha hears words in her head. Words, Timothy. If you worry, you're going to die. Wow. Now, Martha says she was a constant worrier. Her mother worried. She worried. All right. If you worry, you're going to die. And boom, as best she could, she cut it out. 3 weeks later, we get out. She's been in ICU. This is during 9/11. All this stuff happens. And we're on our way back to Tucson after 3 weeks in the hospital. And she sees something. She gets a vision. And the vision is like we're in a church. People are singing. And she says, we're going to be, and she starts to tell me. And I go off. Fuck this bullshit. I ain't in no church. All right. That's it. Martha goes, all right. I saw it. I'm not going to argue about it. All right. This is the year 2000. Well, this is how the great Dharma works. In 2004, we meet somebody at a movie. It was this lady. And we really liked her. And she showed Martha. She said, listen, a friend of mine is coming next week to Tucson, 2005. And he's a psychic. All right. And she showed Martha all these cards, these spirit cards that come to him, that get done in a basket, which are rather amazing. And so we go see this guy, in Phoenix, not here in Tucson. He was already gone when we'd gone to LA that weekend. So we go see him in Phoenix. All right. Now, this psychic was not just a regular psychic. Right? This psychic was like top of the food chain. Like when I tell people, Tucson changed me like the Haight-Ashbury did. You know, I mean, I'm in law school 1 year in the Haight-Ashbury. The next year, I'm listening to Janis Joplin, the Grateful Dead, and running the food concessions at Avalon Baldwin, right in the middle of the mix, and living on Haight Street. All right. Well, we're in Tucson, sitting here. We ended up in the middle of the mix. In the middle of the mix. We see this psychic, Hoyt Romanet, and never met him before. And Martha had a conversation with her father through him. That's what happened to her. She goes to see him before I do. And Martha says, partway through the reading, her father takes over Hoyt's body and starts talking to her. All right? They have a conversation. Now that I have the floor, I'm going to use it. Her father's dead. All right? He was a military guy. Big vocabulary, stood up, in his chair and just boom. I mean, before he came on, Hoyt told me, he said, there's a Jim here, but you wrote down James, and he wants to know why. You called him Dad, and he wanted you to call him Daddy. Well, that's pretty spooky from Martha's point of view. All of it was true. She wrote down James Hildahl. She used his formal name. His name was, everybody knew him as Jim. She called him Dad, and he wanted her to call him Daddy, and she knew it. That was part of that parental, rebellion shit. All right, he was military. This is the Vietnam War. All right, but she didn't. That's what happens to her. She goes in to see him before me. So I go, I'm next. So I go in this room, this 2005, and hand him my little piece of paper. You write down names of people who've died and 5 questions and sign your name, and paper's folded up. You hand it to this guy. All right. He holds it, doesn't read it, holds it in his hand, Timothy, holds it in his hand, looks at it and goes, He says, you're a teacher. I go, no. And he pauses. He goes, you teach. I go, no. And then, because obviously he's hearing things and I'm blowing him off. I mean, obviously, I don't know if he's hearing things. He's a psychic, all right? I don't know how he gets their information. Mm-hmm. And then he goes, well, you know things that other people don't know. And I said, everybody thinks that. But I have no agreement in this world. I have no voice and I have no audience. And he says, this will soon change. People will begin seeking you out. This is 2005. All right? There on the horizon, it doesn't look like, wow, how could this be? The next year, I start writing my book on Time of the Vulture. A year after that, I presented at PDN. 6 months after that, I'm all over the internet. And people are interviewing me. I'm speaking in Europe. People reading my articles. People were seeking me out. That's how we fell into this. That's how we ended up at a church that I never intended to go to again. I mean, I was raised, I spent all my Sundays when growing up in a church and not enjoying it. Wasn't that it was bad, but it ain't my cup of tea.
Right.
All right. And now I am at a spiritualist church in Tucson that is sponsoring psychic Hoyt Robinette to come in twice a year. That the founder of it, Betty Tadaleski, who just passed away, she had taken people from Tucson for 20 years back to Camp Chesterfield, a spiritualist community, to see psychics like Hoyt and like this and get messages. I mean, top level. And we got right in the middle of it, because that's how my life is, right in the middle of it. And Martha and I ended up both as ministers in this spiritualist church. I mean, and you asked, what am I doing now? I started laughing because I just sent my book out, which I finished this spring. It came out of the blue, and the title is called Docking at the Mothership, Notes on Going Home. And in that book, there are all the spiritual writings that I told you about when I was in prison, interspersed with other people's stuff. Back half is sort of economically tied together, and I've got somebody looking at it now. So that's my project.
Nice. When it comes out, make sure that you let me know, or hopefully you've got me on your list.
Oh, you're on the list.
Okay, very good.
You're on the list.
So, and I'll docking at the mothership.
Yeah.
When I worked at Hazelden Foundation, then later they merged with Betty Ford, so now it's Hazelden Betty Ford Foundation.
Yeah.
They always called the Center City location where they had the first Hazelden as the mothership. So anytime I hear mothership, I always think of that.
Yeah.
And I like your titles. I like long titles too.
Yeah.
And I like poetry, so I liked how you interspersed your journaling, I'm going to call it, in your book with the poems. Yeah. And the format is really interesting. It's very rare you'll find a book like that. But if there's any poets out there that really enjoy poetry, you can get some wisdom out of that.
Well, that was because of Martha. When I first put the book together in the year 2000, Light in a Dark Place, it was much more segmented. I had poetry here, stuff here, about my political stuff there. And that's when Martha said, Darryl, you told me all these stories. Like in the book, you read the one when I was with the Hells Angels going away party, my road dog Mao, and the story about Norman Therian. Those are stories she knew because I told her them. And she said, these aren't in the book. You know, that's what you need to put in the book. So I wrote the stories, and then when I wrote the stories and put them in, I jumbled everything up in a different flow. And it is, there's no table of contents because it's a flow. And in fact, the new book also is written quite unorthodox in that way. You know, Document of the Mothership, there's my right. It starts out with the channeling from my son. 1985, nice. I don't know. Yeah. I think, did I show it to you? Send it to you?
No.
I mean,
no, I don't think so. I hope I didn't miss it. I don't think you sent it to me. You sent me some other things. So
yeah.
You know, well, I have an Aquarius moon, so I like anything that's very unusual. And,
well, he's an Aquarian too. All right.
All right. There you go.
And this story is from 1985. This is how it happened. I'm living in Marin County, 1985. Okay. And I have 2 kids, and they're both incredible. I mean, you heard the story from when I talked about Regina. Regina is there. And I told this story about to Regina. I said, you know, kids were raised in a hippie atmosphere. They knew we were hippies, her mother and I. It was before Martha. And so that's our little world. All right. It wasn't that world that everybody else grew up in. And so I said, when I was busted, they were all hippies. You know, they knew, right? And what happened is Rebecca, after she was 9 years old when I was, she may have been 9. Yeah, I think she was when I was busted. And she came down to the bail. She was at the bail hearing, and I heard, and this story was told to me by somebody who was there later, after I got out of prison. And my friend Michelle said, that day when they had the bail hearing, the courtroom was packed. All right, courtroom was packed because my lawyers had phoned up all my friends. All right, and the feds didn't like it. It was packed. They don't like that shit. All right, and so what they did was, usually when you come in a Fed case, they just take you from the back room, you sit your ass down, and then you go back out. Because the courtroom was packed, they perp walked me down, chained to 4 short Mexican heroin dealers down the hallway in front of all my friends. They wanted to do me in public. So there I am, you know, waist chained, leg ironed up, you know, with these other people weren't even my case. And I'm walking down this hallway and I hear Rebecca, her voice, Daddy, Daddy, Daddy. And she's jumping up and down so she'll see me, so I'll see her. That's how pure Rebecca is. All right. So we go in there. And my dharma is such, I want to tell you something, Timothy. My lawyers, if you Google Penny, the documentary, you'll find her. They did a documentary on her on PBS. All right. Her name is Penny Cooper. All right. Let me tell you about dharma and coincidences. Excuse me, I got somebody came here. Hold on, hold on.
Yep.
All right. All right, I'm back.
Okay. All right.
All right. So what happens is that this is 1966. All right. 1966. I just dropped out of law school. I'm living on Haight Street. All right. And these people on Haight Street, they got busted. They were just sort of street people. All right. They were driving in Berkeley and cop pulled them over and guy had a knife on him and they shook him down and arrested him. Well, my wife put up the bail for him, not knowing that if he'd been convicted, he would have run, but it wasn't to happen. So we go over there for the trial, 66, Timothy, maybe 67, probably 67. And this guy has a public defender. She comes in, because the guy got no money. This girl comes out and she ripped the arresting officer apart. I'd never seen anybody like this. I mean, I'm in law school. All right. I've seen Perry Mason. I've never seen anything like this in my life. I mean, Timothy, my joke used to be was she'd put you on the stand and she'd ask you to give your name. You go with Timothy Cameron when you're born. So, and then she'd turn to the jury and said, the question you should be asking yourself is, why did this man lie to us about his name? And the jury go, what? You go, I didn't lie, but it doesn't matter. That's how stinking good she was. That's how she was incredible. She acquitted him. You got him off.
Wow.
I went up to her and I said, man, you're like Nancy Drew on Reds. You know? I mean, I think she had braces on. She was right out of law school. All right? This is 67. And I said, I'm running the food concession down on Baltimore. I could put you on the guest list. She says, well, I'm not into that stuff, but my brother is. So she gives him his name. And whenever he wanted to go, he's a photographer. He used to come over and take pictures of us naked in the Haight-Ashbury. We're hippies. He's a photographer. All right, come to Avalon. Well, a few years later, I meet this other guy, major drug dealer, fugitive. He said, let's go see my lawyer. We go see her. It's Penny Cooper. Penny Cooper is big time by now. In fact, if you see the documentary, in that she talks about the Hells Angels hired her. Now, Timothy, you know about the Angels. You know the guys. They
hired her. They got money.
And they got money, and they're guys.
And they're not going to pick some cheesy lawyer. Mm-mm.
And they're Hells Angels. She walked them, Timothy.
Wow.
She walked them. That's Penny. So we go see her with my friend. All right. He's a fugitive. Wow. Penny and me, we remember each other. That's early 80s. All right. Well, what happens is when I get early 70s, when I get busted in 85, I'm down to almost nothing. All right. And Penny's big time. Penny is big time, Timothy. All right. I met a guy in prison. He paid her $2 million. And you know what he said? He told me she was worth every, quote, penny of it.
Wow.
All right. $2 million. So I get busted in 85. I got almost nothing this time. And friends of mine, and I'm in jail. I call it Penny. Penny always said, just tell them to call me and they got my number. All right. I mean, she is famous if you're in criminal law in California. And I call her up. She comes down to see me, San Francisco County Jail. We're in the room, and she's taking down all the data. And she asks who got busted and who their lawyers were. And I'm naming them off, naming their lawyer. And she goes, he's the snitch. She knew. And then she has my birth date. I write it down to give it to her. And she looks at me and goes, we are getting older, aren't we, Darryl? All right. You know what Penny did? The one they were after, the feds were after, was a Colombian drug dealer. He had major money. They were after him. They got him. He got arrested. And he wanted Penny to be his lawyer. I had squat for money at this time, Timothy. Penny went to the feds and asked to represent me at $60 an hour as a court-appointed defender.
Wow. God bless that lady.
She's the reason I did 10 instead of 20.
Wow.
That's Dharma. That's how this thing rolls out. That's
your
why
voice
I
needs to be out here. Yeah.
That's why I have faith in the process now. That's why I believe in this, that we all are part of, no matter how it shakes out, or no matter how tough it is in the interim. One of my sayings is,
I totally get that. I mean, in God's economy, nothing is wasted.
Nothing is wasted.
My superpower is not committing suicide.
No, when you told me that story, and when you told me, it was magnificent. I mean, I know going through it was hell, and I had the perspective of not having gone through it. But I saw what you did. The will, it forced your will. It was so horrible that you willed yourself to die. And the universe triggered that tremendous will on your part. And even though it looked like it was negative, I knew it was positive. I knew you never would have done that. Nobody ever would have unless they were in a circumstance. And you rose to the occasion because there was no other way out. There was no other way out, and you did it. This is what the universe does. Now, on the front end, you never would have agreed to it.
No,
Never, ever, ever. You said, no, I'll do another incarnation. No, I'm not going to do that. Not that. Because we agreed to it on the front end before we know it.
Right on.
Now, Penny was a part of that. Penny, the story. I know those things now. I know about why this whole thing works. And I'm totally different now at my age than I was when I was younger and didn't know shit about this. I have faith. My joke about myself, Timothy, used to be, here lies Darryl Robert Schoon. He had everything except faith. You know?
I was going to ask you what you're going to put on your tombstone. I think it's different today, but
it's different today.
Yeah.
I have faith. Thank God I have faith. I mean, and it came the hard way. You know, it came from being shoved. I remember that thing. You know, I told you about Rebecca. You know what? Let me tell you what she said. So my friend said she was there at the bail hearing. Penny's my lawyer. Penny wasn't there that day. Her associate, Chris Arguelles, who's one of the top. Chris Arguelles is such an incredible attorney that when O.J. Simpson was busted, he really thought he wanted to testify. He wanted to get up to the stand. He's an actor. He's trying to get pull his shit off. So you know what his lawyers did? They called Chris Arguelles, Penny's associate, to come down and do a walkthrough, show him what it's like on the stand in the hands of somebody who knew what they were doing. So they brought her down to cross-examine O.J. Simpson, you know, out of the, where nobody could see it, only he did.
Of course.
After her cross-examination, he agreed he wasn't going to take the stand. That's how good these lawyers were. So Penny wasn't there that day. Chris was. All right. And I got out on bail. But one of my friends told me later, after I got out of prison years later, that day she asked Rebecca, well, Rebecca, what do you think of all this? And Rebecca looked at her and said, well, I'm reading the diary of Anne Frank, and this isn't that bad. So you get kids like that. You get lawyers like that. I know that life is tough. And my life is a cakewalk compared to what you went through, Timothy.
You know, I have a theory about that, Darryl, and you know, I appreciate where you're going with that because, well, I just do. I appreciate you. I know I can sense where you're coming from. But I learned somewhere along the way. I think it was in actually probably. I had so many spiritual experiences in my life, but the spiritual awareness usually comes later. You know, when you get older. You know, so it's like, oh, I actually had a spiritual experience then, but I was giving it the finger. You know.
Yeah.
And but you know, so sometimes that happens. But you know, people were talking during some meetings and saying, well, I'm glad I never drove drunk and killed somebody, and whatever else people say. Yeah. And they say, I'm glad I never had this consequence. And I always thought, man, I would rather have had the consequences I had than get a divorce. And I've seen these men who were in pain in prison when their woman left them, and Martha's still with you. And your daughter still loves you. And I've seen people just as a strong man just disintegrate when their woman leaves. And it's usually after a year or two, they're gone.
Yeah.
You know? And I always thought I would rather have gone through the consequences that I went through because I didn't have family. I didn't have someone visiting me. I didn't have anyone who I felt loved me and stuff. So, and I was good with that. It's like,
oh yeah, you had locked it off.
Yeah, it's like, you know, I am so lucky is what I thought. But here's where I'm going with this, Darryl, is I think I know this is your interview and I'm not taking time from you. But I feel like we all, every human being, with very few exceptions, endure about the same amount of pain. You know, and you know, somebody might just have what we would consider to be a minor incident in our life,
And to
but
them,
and to them, they experience the mountain falling on their heart,
yeah,
and they had the same amount of pain. But for me, it took a lot more, and my sacred contract was to get to that same place,
yes,
but it would take a lot more to do it. Now, when I
yes,
said my superpower is not committing suicide, and you knew right away part of what that meant and
yeah.
why, and I'm honored that you even remember that story. Um,
I don't hear a lot of them like
yeah,
that.
yeah, right. So, um, and I one reason during the dark night of the soul, which is partly why I wanted to read your book, because I've been through the dark night of the soul, and there's a light shining in darkness, and darkness doesn't comprehend it, and all that stuff. And I thought, this is spirit talking to Darryl. I got to read this book. I saw some alignments between what I perceived, when you came to my attention in the way that you did at the time that you did. Just things do that. Life.
Mhm.
And but during that period of my life, there was a couple of reasons I didn't commit suicide. One is because I knew that life is a choice. When I died in prison, I realized that I'm alive because my spirit says it's not time yet. When it's time, you can either get hit by a car, or your spirit will leave a different way, whatever it is.
Whatever it is.
So, we don't have to kill ourselves to die. That's not a necessity. So I knew that part. And if I'm alive, my mission isn't done yet. And I was, during this dark night of the soul, I was crying to God every day, all day for 2.5 years, please just kill me, but my life didn't belong to me anymore. I turned it over to, creator God, as I understand God, and no two people understand this the same way, but I thought, it's not my life to take. I can't rip God off from my life because it doesn't belong to me anymore. And secondly, I knew if I didn't go through these suicidal ideations and come through the other side of it, when someone else is in as much pain as I was, if I quit, then I won't be there for them when they're going through it. And
Wow.
we have to be here for each other.
Mm.
We have to love each other, and that's why we're still here. If anything matters after, the near-death experiences are almost universally saying the same thing.
Yeah.
When they get
You got to
there
come
and
back.
they go to the light, nobody says, "Oh, you have to leave because you're not a particular race.
Yeah.
Oh, you're not a Republican or a
Yeah.
Democrat. You can't come in. Your orientation is wrong. Bye." Nobody asks what race you are when you get to the light. They only ask, "Do you have love?" And if we're not done loving yet, then we come back. And it is a choice. We do get a choice, though. That's the thing people don't realize. If we're here, it's because we want to be. Our spirit knows where we're supposed to be. And when it's time to go, we will leave, but we will leave something behind for someone else. And that's where the question comes in. Today, what would you put on your tombstone? What would you want it to read?
The luckiest man I knew was myself.
That is so good. A friend of mine said, I think I would put on there the recipient of a ridiculous amount of grace.
You know, I grew up and after hearing stories like yours and all these other people, I realized I had been sort of whiny about my childhood, and it was psychologically very intense. I mean, when my chart was done, um, and this is how I run into my astrology. Yeah, I'm a hippie, but I think all this astrology is bullshit. You're really deep in this stuff. This is before I believed it. I'm just I'm in law school and living with all these hippies on Haight Street. I'm smoking pot and doing drugs, but still they're crazy, right? It's fucking hippies. And this guy does my chart. He wants to do my chart, and uh, so he asked for my wife to come over and give me your birth date and your time of birth, blah blah blah. So we did. So we go over and he says, okay, he wants to interpret it for us. Well, this person does it, and he's reading my chart, and he says, no, he's reading her chart first, and he goes, this person will be separated from probably their mother, leaving them very insecure. Well, My wife's mother died when she was 12. Just left her blasted the way it happened. Just the way it happened was brutal. And it's true. Wow. I didn't believe this shit, but that was pretty much a right on hit. Then he comes to me and he says, this person will have a conflict with one of their parents, probably the father. Conflict. I was 22 when my chart was being read. I had been at war with my father since I was 5. War, Timothy. War. All right? War. And what happened is this helped because I realized it was impersonal. Somebody was going to be my father. He chose it. All right? And I wrote him a letter and I said, listen, I know being, having me for a son wasn't easy for you because as good as he could give it, I gave it back. I told my mother, year before she died, she came to see me. And she said, she knew my father had been at war. This is like 40 years. I mean, bone war. And I said, Mom, Dad really wanted to feel proud of the kids he raised because he did everything for us, piano lessons, everything, gave it to us. But he was strict. And I'm an Aquarian. He's a Capricorn. All right? I mean, never the twain should meet, except that's what you do. You meet. And I said, you know what? And she nods. She says, yeah. I said, well, I knew that too. I said, one of the reasons I think I went to prison was to do that in. And my mother's a school teacher. She looks at me and she goes, don't you think that's a bit extreme? I just gave me over 7 years in prison. And I looked and I said, it worked, didn't it? That's how intense it was. But because of astrology and knowing that we choose this on the other side, my father and I are cool. In fact, during that first session with Hoyt, all right, he's sitting there and people are coming in, my mother's guy, and then my father, and Hoyt goes, listen, the psychic, he goes, he wants me to know he's a part of this project. Wow. He wants me to know he's a part of this project. I knew by the time I was having the talk with the psychic, my life was not normal. Things happened to me that didn't happen to other people. I don't just in the story I told you about Penny and all that stuff. It's not normal. The kids I had, the friends I had, the conversation, it's not normal. It doesn't make me better. It just means I have a very unique trajectory. And that my father told Hoyt he was part of this project gave me a perspective on it. Wow, Dad, you are part of this project. You chose to be my dad, which was a bitch. I mean, if it was a bitch for me, it was a bitch for him. And I told him that. And after my mother died, she died 4 months after that, war was over. Over. Now, I don't know how other people handle this shit, but the way my father and I did, when he got news and he told me that my mother had died, 40 years of brutal warfare between us ended. Nobody said it was just over. Mom had died. Wow. And I know in my heart of hearts, she died to bring us together because I know about that maternal love. I know about the mother. I know about how it comes. And I know to her, the most important thing was to heal the war between my father and I. And if it took dying, so be it. She's willing to do it. And that's how I know this thing works. We all learn about love and we pay the price and we pass it on and we do what we do, wherever we are, whether we know it or not. And that's why, going through this thing that we're going through now, I'm happy that I've ever been. Happier than I've ever been. And I've had a lot more money than I have now. I've had a lot, 1980, 1970s. I had everything before I got busted. I had everything that people thought they'd have, they'd be happy. Happily married, 2 incredible kids, money that if I didn't do a damn thing with the rest of my life, I could have lived forever and cruise. But it wasn't in my dharma. It wasn't in my dharma. And I thank God for my dharma because my dharma gave me far more than I would have ever asked for on my own.
I want to read a quote out of your book, if you don't mind,
No.
at all. Okay, just making sure.
Yeah.
You know, I underlined it because I really like the meaning of this, and it has to do with Zeb. So he would patiently remind me, you wrote, that if Jews were as committed to the truth as they were to fear and guilt, there would be no fear in the world. There would be only truth. I thought, oh my God, that's so deep. And you can apply this to almost any discipline, because there's so many of us that are just, we're living in fear, we're living in guilt, you know, and, you know, I think the guilt is the father of almost all pain, you know, and if we could just dump the fear of what we think others will think of us, or what that other part of us that you mentioned thinks about the other part of ourselves, you know. And I think the world is kind of like addicted to misery or something. And that was great wisdom in that line, I think.
You know, Timothy, I think I think that that's the purpose of our life, not to make us suffer, but to get over that which is causing the suffering.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing about fear, I don't like being afraid.
No.
And I think that's why I was a drug dealer. I told people, I said, I look back on that era of my life. I mean, fake names, you know.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, when I met Penny in '66, I wasn't a drug dealer. Never done a damn, you know. I mean, bought pot and that kind of shit. That's different than dealing. All right. And then when I saw her later with my friend, the fugitive, I had, you know, gotten caught. But even then, that wasn't drug dealing the way I call it drug dealing. When the roof came down on me, I knew what it was. All right. And I used to tell people, I said, well, you know, I look back on myself during that time, and I said, I had friends of mine who liked dealing. They liked the edge. They knew it. He sort of came alive, right? And consciously on my thing, I didn't think I did, but I tell people, I said, well, I said, I felt sort of like an accountant trapped in the body of a pirate, right? There it was. You know, got the knife, was going to take a ship, and I'm on a pirate ship. And holy shit, I should be doing down there in the hold doing the books, you know, counting the ingots and all this shit and keeping track of shit. How come I got to fight? Well, I did. And be that as it may, there was a point before I got busted in the, you know, the 10-year prison sentence. I'm with a friend of mine, and he did a long time in prison. I mean, a long time in prison. All right. And we're buds, you know, we're in the same line of work. And we're in Marin County, and he's driving, and we're coming the backside down towards 101. This is 84. And we, you know, deserted road, okay? And all of a sudden we hear the loudspeaker, driver of the car, pull it. And he looks up and goes, oh shit. And following us were 4 unmarked blue-gray Fords. Loudspeaker, doors open, guys with rifles on us. We pull over. Pull over. Driver. Put your hands on the windshield. We do. Driver. Roll down your windshield. He does. Keep your other hands visible. With your left hand, pull the keys and throw them in the street. He does. We're sitting there. All right. Now, open the door with your left hand. Keep your right hand visible. He does. Now get out of the car on your knees with your hands in the air. Well, he tries to. He can't because his seatbelt's on. Driver, get out of the car now with your hands visible on your knees. He can't. He's trying to get out. And I can see it. They don't know. Fucking assholes. I reach down and I hit his release button. You can hear the guns going up. All right? Nobody's fired. He gets out of the car on his knees, walks back. Now it's my turn. All right? Open my door, get up. My knees, walk backwards. They put him in one car, they put him in another car, handcuffed. All right? They don't tell us what they're doing. They were looking for somebody else. Interpol. Had been some guy staying at his house. All right. I didn't know that. They thought I was him, right? Until they looked at her driver's license. They said, oh no. And they knew we were what we were. They come by and they had done this to any person. There would have been lawyers all over it. You know, when they let us go, we go, oh, no problem, sir. You know, no problem. You know, all's well that ends well. We leave. When I was in that car before they let us go, we didn't know what was happening. Handcuffed behind my back. I'm sitting there thinking, okay, it's 12:30. Rebecca gets out of school in 2 hours. I'm going to need somebody to go pick her up. Blah, blah, blah. I'm going through this list of what I should do. And as my mind was going through that, Timothy, I made the observation. This was not the Darryl Schoon 10 years before.
Uh-huh.
This was not the me that I thought was me.
Mm-hmm.
This was a different me. This was a me that was, now they let us go. You know, I was going to go down later, you know, for no more guns, more shit. But that day, no. That day, I was able to go and pick Rebecca up at school an hour and a half and not tell her what happened that day. All right. And that was, I had to go through the fears. And that's why in the book, Light in a Dark Place, you could see the poem to the Gypsy Girl.
Mm-hmm. That was good. I really
I
enjoyed
didn't know all the fears that I go through. I didn't know that. And I didn't. And that was, I think, part of my growth. I had to learn how to deal with fear and uncertainty by going through it.
Yeah, I feel like she blessed your life in a really cool way.
Yeah. You know, it was,
Yeah.
I mean, that poem came to me. I was in prison and they were sitting there and bang, and it just rolled. And so when I wrote Journey the Gypsy Girl, that was in 80, probably 88, 87. And then the light, like what it said at the end of the book, where to the Gypsy Girl later, there I was getting out of prison. This is like 5 years later. I'm getting out of prison. And I'm in the halfway house in San Francisco. And some guy had just come in. He was starting a 15-year sentence. We're in a halfway house in San Francisco. And I read him my poem. He was on his way in, Journey the Gypsy Girl. So I read him that poem. And he looks at me and he said, it's not done. There's more. And that night, the rest of the verses came out, just like that, about that.
Yes.
This is
It's
all
part of spiritual evolution. Yeah.
part of spiritual evolution.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And we're
It's in your spiritual DNA to keep that spiritual evolution going. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
no, you didn't. And that's if I was going to say anything to anybody, I know how strained up everybody is. I know what this looks like. I know all the uncertainty, and I'm 76 and I'm a lot more at peace with it than when I was younger.
Mm-hmm.
And I had to go through all this stuff so I could get at peace with it. But it was just part of what I chose, even though I don't know I chose it. And knowing what I went through, I would never have chosen it. And it's only on the backside that I'm able to see what I gained out of it. And some people's lives, they never get to see that when they're here. It's just like one tragedy after another, and they go and they don't get any resolution on this side. And I know that part of my luck, the love that on my path, that I got to see it before they pull the final curtain here, because there are no final curtains.
Mm-hmm.
But I know there looks like a final curtain, and I got to see this on this side of the curtain, which is a blessing. Tremendous.
Yeah, that's the spiritual awareness from the spiritual experience. And I think people have spiritual experiences all the time, but it's like they don't ever quite get it.
No,
It's
we
like,
don't get it.
There's so many people that are like walking on water, dancing on water, however you want to look at it. I look at it as a dance. But
Yes.
they're walking on water and they're complaining about the fact that there's something wrong in their life and they can't even realize they're walking on water.
Walking on water. That is a miracle.
And it's like there's so many people that should have been dead 50 times. They've had divine interventions and they have no conception of the choices that they've made that allowed them to live through the impossible, you know.
Timothy,
And you know,
I understand that.
yeah.
And I understand that I'm lucky that I know that I'm lucky.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Because at a certain point, I was so plexed up, miracles happened to me, and it didn't sink in. And I still, even though I know they have, they're still sinking in. Because when you're in a state of plexicity or plexatious or pressure, that's all you can feel. The idea that it's a miracle, you can't feel it because the other stuff is got you and you're pinned. And it's part of a process. And until you're able to get there, you're never going to get it. But you will get it eventually in this life or the next or the next or the next. And in the Dharma of it, there's no time. But here, it really seems like there is time. And for those of us who've done time, we know what
doing time and serving time and flipping the script to make time serve you,
Yes.
kind of that deal.
That's
what's really interesting, we're getting pretty close to our time here, is that I had all these questions prepared, and it's like you were reading. I did not send you these questions.
No, you didn't.
And you've answered every one of them except for one.
All right.
And the one that you haven't answered, or maybe I didn't have the discernment to see that you did, but it's what makes you laugh or smile on command? Is there any automatic thing that makes you laugh or smile on command, if you will? Martha would probably know this too, but
I like when my mind is blown, because I tell you, my mind, I got it locked down. I got it figured out. To me, pieces. Everything's pigeonholed. Everything's put together. Everything's ordered. As strange as my world is, I got it figured out. And I love it when it blows up. And something happens, like just like this person. Because I'm only using this because of it's back in my life again, just because of friends. We knew this couple, and they were raised, and we knew them. It was Dharma that brought us together in Tucson, and they were so closed off from the rest of the world that when we ran into them, became their friends. Their kids went, "We got to meet these people. They don't have any friends." Their parents had no friends. All right, as far as they knew, had a huge family, but there were no friends outside that family. And somehow they're growing up, and they hear that their parents met this couple, Martha and me, right? Met us, and we were accepting this. But the kids go, "What the fuck? We got to meet there. How they meet these people?" Well, we became friends with them, very deep friends, and the kids were pretty much sort of screwed up by the fear of the way they were raised, and one of them just made it. She just got on her own and did it. The other kid was, man, it was like he was never going to get out of there. He was living on the street, basically, during a certain point. On the street, medicated. All right? On the street and medicated on SSI. All right? And he made it out. And both of the kids and we love their parents, and we could see how it happened this way. But I'm happy. And because I wouldn't have put any money on him making it out at all. And he did. I love it when my locked in brain doesn't see a way out and the universe shows it to me.
Amen.
Not necessarily it makes me laugh, but it makes me just feel
it brings you that joy. Yeah,
it brings me
gratitude.
That joy.
Yeah.
That I had locked it in, no hope, no nothing. And I was wrong. In fact, I said, the happiest I am, Timothy, is when I'm wrong. And I know people just want to be right. I know what I want to be right. Everybody wants to be right. But I'm happiest when I know that life wasn't the way I thought it was. Mm-hmm. I had life figured out before life figured me out. Life gave it to me. And there was no hope. We were fucked. We were fucked big time. The odds were against all of us. Mm-hmm. And I know it's not true. So
right.
being wrong about that makes this kid happy.
I love that. There's this thing that I keep in front of me pretty much 24/7. And it's just an arrangement. So I've had this thing for 20 years. It's been spilled on and weird marks, but it's just the words "love conquers all" in a different order, you know. And it just reminds me of like, you know, if you have an explosion and there's a dictionary above a bomb and the bomb explodes the dictionary and all the words drop down in exactly the order of the Bible or something, you know, or the Torah, you know. And so, you know, and I love that analogy. And it's like the dictionary and the Bible, they have the exact same words, they're just in different orders. And that's, yeah, but it's our perception that only allows us to see it in the order that we need to see it. And that's from the inside out. That's the mother.
You know, we're hanging on to life with a death grip, right? We're hanging on to the miracle with a
That's ironic.
And what happens is that the universe wants us to let go. And we're scared shitless about letting go. And it will do the minimum to make us let go. And to us, that minimum is basically as much as we can endure.
Amen. Namaste, brother. Thank you so much for being a guest on The Incomplete Skeptic. And I'm glad that the universe smiled on us today. And thanks for touching my heart as always. And may your heart always be touched, my brother. You know, peace and love.
Peace and love.
Namaste. And to the folks watching the program, thank you for tuning in. It's like Jeffrey Mishlove says, thank you for tuning in.
That's it. Yeah.
All right.
He's far more gracious than I am.
Yes, sir. Yeah, me too. Right. Peace out. Catch ya. All right. Bye-bye.